The stone breathed. Cold. It seeped through the thin mattress, through the threadbare tunic they gave her, and settled deep in her bones. For a year, that chill had been her only constant companion, that and the drip. A slow, maddening rhythm from the corner of her cell, each drop echoing the slow beat of her own forgotten heart. Drip, drip, drip. She was a ghost living in a tomb before she had even died. They called this place the Vault, a name too grand for a cellar carved from the mountain's gut, lined with the one thing their kind feared more than death: silver. It coated the bars of her cell, woven into the very mortar between the stones. Its scent was a constant metallic tang on the back of her tongue, a clean, sterile poison that smothered the world. It burned away the scent of pine from the forests, the scent of rain on the wind, the scent of her own wolf. She wondered sometimes if she even had one left. The prophecy had named her mate to the Alpha King. The greatest honor, they'd whispered at first. The moon had blessed her. Fate had chosen her. Then the whispers had changed. They soured into something sharp and fearful. The king was cursed. His power, a legend. His touch, a death sentence. Every bond he'd ever tried to form had shattered, leaving only blood and madness behind. So she was not his mate. Not really. She was a key, a lock, a sacrifice. And so they had brought her here, to the silver silence, to be kept pure, to be kept safe, to be kept until he needed her, until the curse demanded its price. A metallic clang broke the silence. The small square slot at the bottom of her cell door scraped open. A wooden bowl slid through, landing with a dull thud on the stone floor. Gruel. The same gray, tasteless paste they had given her every day for 365 days. She didn't move. Her stomach was a tight, cold knot. Hunger was a distant ache, one she had learned to ignore. The guard's shadow fell across the slot. They never spoke. They were forbidden. Just as she was forbidden to see the king, speak his name, or even hear it whispered. He was a faceless, nameless dread that ruled her life from a distance, a monster in a story told to frighten children. Only this monster was real, and she was meant to be his end. Or he hers. She crawled from her cot, the rough fabric of her tunic scraping against her skin. Her knees protested as she knelt before the bowl. The smell of oats and water filled her nose, bland and lifeless. It was the smell of survival, nothing more. She ate, slowly, methodically, forcing each swallow past the lump of despair in her throat. When she finished, she pushed the empty bowl back toward the slot. It sat there for a long moment. Usually it was snatched back immediately, but today was different. A low grunt came from the other side of the door, a sound of irritation. "Take it," a voice rasped. A new guard. His voice was rough, like stones grinding together. She flinched. A voice. It was so jarring after a year of silence that it felt like a physical blow. She pushed the bowl again, her fingers trembling. "Useless," the guard muttered, the sound muffled by the thick ironwood door. The bowl was finally snatched away. The slot slammed shut, the echo loud and violent in the small space. She retreated to her corner, wrapping her arms around her knees. Useless. The word clung to her. It was true. She did nothing. She was nothing. A waiting game. A lamb being fattened in a silver pen. Her mind drifted back to the day they took her. She had been 19. Her hair, the color of spun moonlight, had been braided with winter roses. The elder council had stood before her, their faces grim, their robes smelling of dried herbs and solemn duty. "The moon has spoken," the high elder, a woman with eyes like chips of flint, had declared. Her voice had not held joy or reverence. It had held a heavy, tired certainty. "You are the one, the final vessel." Her parents had wept, not tears of pride, tears of terror. They had led her away, not to a chamber in the palace adorned with silks, but down into the cold, quiet dark, down to the scent of silver and wet stone. The king, they said, could not be near her, not yet. His curse was a living thing, a shadow wolf that stalked his bloodline. It fed on connection, on affection, on the fragile spark of a mating bond. It twisted it, turning it into a poison that consumed both him and his chosen. He had outlived 3. The first, a princess from the southern clans, had lasted a month. They said her screams had carved themselves into the palace stones. The second, a warrior from the east, had lasted a week. She had tried to fight the curse. They found her surrounded by a circle of ash that had once been her own wolf. The third, they didn't speak of the third. And now there was her, Lyra Valerius, the girl born under a bleeding moon with a mark on her wrist shaped like a fallen star. The girl, the prophecy had promised, would either heal the king or be the one to finally break him. The court was betting on the latter. A tremor ran through the floor. Lyra's head snapped up. It was faint. A deep guttural vibration that seemed to come from the very mountain itself. She pressed her ear to the cold stone, listening. It came again, stronger this time. A roar, not of a beast, but of a man. A sound of such raw, untamed agony that the air in her cell seemed to thin, to crackle. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced the dull ache of her existence. She had heard it before, but only in the distance. Faint echoes of a pain she could not comprehend. But this was closer. The guards outside her cell, usually silent statues, began to move. Hasty, shuffling footsteps, the clink of armor, muffled, panicked whispers. Uncontrolled. The chains. He broke the words were disjointed, swallowed by the stone, but she heard enough. He, the king, the monster in the dark. A new scent bled through the cracks around the door. It cut through the sterile burn of the silver like a blade. It was wild and elemental. Pine needles crushed after a storm. The sharp crack of ozone before a lightning strike. The scent of blood and winter and a terrible, terrible rage. Her heart, that slow, tired muscle, began to hammer against her ribs. A frantic, terrified rhythm. This scent. It was alive. It was powerful. It made the air heavy, thick, hard to breathe. It felt like it was searching. It felt like it was searching for her. She scrambled back, pressing herself into the corner of the cell, trying to make herself small, trying to disappear into the shadows. The silver bars seemed to hum with new intensity, a defensive energy that made her teeth ache. The shouting outside grew louder, then abruptly stopped. Cut off. Replaced by a sound that would haunt her forever. A wet, tearing sound, a choked gasp. The heavy thud of a body hitting the stone floor, then another, silence. A deep, profound silence that was more terrifying than the noise had been. It was a predator's silence, a listening silence. Lyra held her breath. The only sound was the frantic drumming in her ears, the drip, drip, drip of the water. Then footsteps, heavy, deliberate, each one a thunderclap that shook her soul. They stopped directly outside her door. The air grew impossibly cold. The wild scent of storm and pine was overwhelming now, seeping into her lungs, into her very blood. It was a scent of absolute power, of a wolf so dominant, so ancient, that the world itself seemed to bend around him. She squeezed her eyes shut. Don't see me! Don't find me! Go away! A low growl rumbled through the door. It wasn't just a sound. She felt it in her chest, a vibration that resonated with a part of her she thought was dead. A primal, instinctual terror seized her. This was the apex, the king. The door handle rattled, then a splintering crack. The thick ironwood groaned, protesting. Metal shrieked. With a sound like the world tearing in two, the lock shattered. The door blew inward, torn from its hinges, as if it were paper. It crashed against the far wall, the impact echoing like a death knell. And in the doorway, wreathed in shadows and fury, he stood. He was a nightmare-given form, taller than any man she had ever seen, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of his broken kingdom. His hair was the black of a starless midnight, matted with sweat and something darker. Scars littered his skin, faint silver lines that told a story of 100 battles fought, both inside and out. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They glowed with a faint feral light, the color of molten gold. They were the eyes of a caged god, filled with a storm of agony, rage, and a desperate, soul-deep hunger. He was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling in great, shuddering gasps. The scent rolling off him was intoxicating and terrifying. He was the curse, the monster, the Alpha King, Rorik Volkov. His name, unspoken for a year, bloomed in her mind like a poisonous flower. He took a step into the cell, then another. The silver bars on either side of the broken doorframe hissed, their power flaring against his proximity, but he didn't even flinch. He was focused entirely on her, his golden eyes pinning her to the wall. He didn't look like a king. He looked like a force of nature, a storm that had finally broken its chains. She couldn't breathe, she couldn't move. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, but there was nowhere to go. This was it, the end of the waiting. He stopped, just a few feet away. His gaze swept over her, taking in her thin frame, her pale face, her wide, terrified eyes. A flicker of something, confusion, regret, crossed his harsh features before being swallowed again by the storm. He lifted a hand. It was large, calloused, stained with fresh blood. He was going to touch her. He was going to kill her. The prophecy was a lie. There was no healing. There was only this, the final, bloody end. The elder's scent of sterile herbs faded from her memory, replaced by this smell of pine and storm and broken crowns. And for the first time in a year, Lyra Valerius felt her own blood, thin and cold in her veins, answer back with a defiant, impossible heat. Time stopped. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of his rage and the clean, sharp burn of the silver walls. His shadow was a shroud, stealing the faint torchlight from the corridor, leaving her in the twilight of his presence. His hand, stained and scarred, moved with a terrifying slowness. It was not the hand of a king. It was the hand of a predator. Lyra pressed herself harder against the stone, her bones aching with the cold. Her mind was a white scream of silence. This is it. This is the end they promised me. The story swirled in her head, of blood and ash and madness. She would be another forgotten name, another sacrifice to a cursed throne. His fingers, rough and calloused, brushed against the sleeve of her tunic. She flinched, a gasp tearing from her throat. The contact was a spark in the suffocating dark. He paused, his head tilting, those molten gold eyes narrowing as if he'd heard a sound no one else could. He was listening to her heartbeat, her terror, her very blood singing its frantic song. Then his fingers closed around her wrist. His grip was not gentle, it was desperate. The grip of a man falling from a great height, snatching at the only thing that might stop his descent. His touch should have been death. It should have been a fire that consumed her, a poison that turned her veins to ice. Instead, a jolt, fierce and electric, shot up her arm. It was not pain, it was recognition. A searing heat bloomed from the point of contact, a warmth that spread through her chilled limbs like a sudden thaw. It felt like coming home to a house she'd never known. The star-shaped mark on her wrist, a pale silvery scar she'd had since birth, began to burn with a light of its own. She looked down. Beneath his calloused fingers, her skin was glowing. A soft, ethereal silver light pulsed in time with her heart, pushing back the shadows. A strangled sound escaped his throat. Not a growl, not a roar. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. His grip slackened. The storm in his eyes faltered, the golden fury receding like a tidal wave, leaving behind a shore of stunned human clarity. He looked from her glowing wrist to her face, his expression one of utter disbelief. The lines of pain etched around his eyes seemed to soften. For a breathtaking second, she saw not the monster, not the cursed king, but the man trapped inside. He yanked his hand back as if he'd been burned, stumbling a step away from her. He stared at his own palm, flexing his fingers, then looked back at her, his ragged breathing the only sound in the cell. The glow on her wrist faded, but the warmth remained. A tingling hum beneath her skin. She was alive. She was alive, and he was confused. The beast was still there, lurking behind his eyes, but it was watching her now with a wary curiosity instead of blind hunger. He had come to destroy, or be destroyed. This was not part of the prophecy. From far down the stone corridors, a new sound arose, the frantic rhythmic clang of armored boots on stone. Shouts echoed, growing closer. This way. The vault has been breached. Find him, subdue him. The king's head snapped toward the sound. The brief moment of clarity in his eyes was shattered, replaced by a gathering darkness. But it was different now. Before, his rage had been a chaotic, internal storm. Now it had a direction, a target. A low growl started deep in his chest, a vibration she felt in the floor, in her bones. It was the sound of a mountain preparing to shift. He took a slow, deliberate step, not toward the door, not away from her. He moved in front of her. He placed his body between her and the entrance to the cell, a living shield of muscle and fury. The torchlight of the approaching guards spilled into the doorway, casting his silhouette in stark relief. He was a giant, a primal guardian standing before the mouth of his cave. The first of the royal guard appeared, their silver-tipped spears held at the ready. Their faces were grim masks of duty, but their eyes widened in fear as they took in the scene. The two dead guards on the floor, the shattered door. The king, not thrashing in madness, but standing with a sentinel's stillness. And behind him, the girl, the sacrifice, unharmed. The captain of the guard, a hard-faced man with a thick, gray-streaked beard, stepped forward. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice strained but firm, "step away from the prisoner. We are here to help you." Rorik did not turn. He did not acknowledge the captain's words. His golden gaze remained fixed on Lyra, a silent, searching question in their depths. It was as if he was seeing her for the first time, not as a prophecy or a cure, but as a woman, a person, his wolf. The curse that had ruled him was quiet. For the first time in what must have been years, the man was in control. "My king," the captain barked, taking another cautious step. "The elders have been summoned. Do not make us—" With a movement so fast it was almost a blur, Rorik turned his head, just enough to fix the captain with a look of pure, undiluted authority. The growl in his chest deepened into something that was no longer just beastly. It was royal. It was a command. He spoke. His voice was a ruin, a gravelly rasp from disuse and screaming, but it held the weight of 1,000 years of lineage. It was the voice of the mountain itself. "She is not your prisoner." The guards froze. The captain's mouth fell slightly open. This was not the mindless, roaring creature they were sent to chain. This was their king. Rorik took a deep, shuddering breath, the scent of pine and storm, and her own strange, silvery blood filling the cell. His gaze flickered back to Lyra, and in that fleeting look, she saw an entire world of pain, of solitude, and a new, terrifying flicker of possession. He had touched her and lived. She had been touched by him and survived. The laws of their world had just been broken. He turned fully to face the guards, his broad back a solid wall protecting her from the world. He was still a monster, he was still a curse, but something had changed in the heart of the storm. His golden eyes met the captain's, and the words that left his lips were not a roar of madness, but the first command of a king reborn. "No one touches her." Silence was a living thing. It pressed in on them, heavier than stone, thicker than the mountain air. The guards stood frozen, their silver-tipped spears suddenly looking like children's toys against the sheer, raw presence of their king. His words hung in the air, a decree that had shattered a year of silence, a year of policy, a year of fear. "No one touches her." The captain of the guard slowly, cautiously, lowered his spear. The gesture was one of reluctant submission, his eyes wide with a confusion that mirrored Lyra's own. He was a soldier, trained to fight the king's madness, not his sanity. Rorik did not lower his stance. He remained a bulwark of coiled muscle and furious intent, his breathing the only sound in the tense tableau. He was watching them, his golden eyes scanning each man, daring them to move, to breathe, to question. He was protecting her. The thought was so alien, so utterly impossible, that Lyra felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. For a year, she had been the thing to be protected from him, a weapon kept under lock and key until the moment it was needed to disarm the bomb. Now, the bomb was standing guard over the trigger. From the back of the corridor, a new presence emerged. The scent of dried herbs and cold, unyielding certainty preceded them. The elders. The High Elder, a woman named Morwen, whose face seemed carved from ancient, weathered stone, pushed her way to the front. Her flint-gray eyes took in the scene with a chilling lack of surprise. The dead guards, the broken door, the king standing over the girl. It was as if she had expected this carnage, but then her gaze fell on Lyra, truly fell on her, and for the first time since Lyra had known her, Morwen's composure cracked. A flicker of disbelief, of something close to fear, crossed her features. Lyra was supposed to be dead, or screaming, or a pile of ash. She was none of those things. She was just there, huddled in the corner, her thin tunic a stark white against the gray stone. her eyes wide with a terror that was slowly being replaced by a bewildering new reality. "Rorik," Morwen said, her voice sharp and commanding, cutting through the silence like a shard of glass. "Step aside. The vessel has been compromised." The king's growl returned, low and menacing. A tremor of rage shook his massive frame. Vessel. The word was an insult, a desecration. "Her name," he rasped, his voice a low thunder that made the stone vibrate, "is not Vessel." He didn't know her name. Lyra realized it with a jolt. How could he? He had been as much a prisoner as she was, caged by his own curse. But he refused the label they had given her. He refused to see her as an object, a tool. Not anymore. "She is the key to breaking the curse," Morwen countered, her voice rising, laced with an impatience that bordered on fury. "Her purpose is to absorb the taint when the end comes. Proximity before the ritual will spoil her purity. You know this. You are endangering centuries of planning." He took a slow step toward the broken doorway, his shadow falling over the High Elder. The guards tensed, raising their spears again. "Your planning," he said, his voice dripping with a venomous contempt, "has cost me everything. It has cost this kingdom its heart. No more." His gaze flickered back to Lyra. The intensity in his eyes was a physical force. It was a question, an apology, and a promise all at once. It spoke of a lifetime of solitude, of a pain so deep it had become the very fabric of his being. And now, for the first time, he had found something that did not break when he reached for it. He looked at her wrist, the one he had touched, as if he could still see the ghost of the silver light. Morwen followed his gaze, her eyes narrowed. "What did you do?" she demanded, her voice a harsh whisper. He didn't answer her. Instead, he turned his full attention back to Lyra. He took a hesitant step back into the cell, his movements slow, deliberate, as if approaching a wild, easily startled animal. He was giving her space. He was showing her he was not a threat. But he was the most dangerous thing in this mountain, in this entire kingdom. He knelt. The king of the Shadowlands, the cursed Alpha, whose roar could shatter stone, sank to one knee on the cold, filthy floor of her cell. The gesture was so profound, so utterly shocking, that a collective gasp went through the guards. He lowered his head, a sign of submission that no one had ever seen from him. He began, his voice rough, struggling with the unfamiliar words. "I will not harm you." His scent was still overwhelming, storm and pine and the metallic tang of blood, but the suffocating rage had bled out of it. What was left was a raw, primal power, and underneath it, a deep, aching loneliness that called to a forgotten part of her soul. She found her voice. It was a dry, rasping thing, thin from a year of disuse. "Why?" The single word was a feather in a hurricane, but he heard it. He lifted his head, his golden eyes meeting hers. The raw pain in them stole her breath. "Because when I touched you," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate rumble that was meant only for her. The monster slept. Her heart stumbled. The curse, his shadow wolf. The thing that had driven him to madness and murder. It had gone quiet. The silver light from her blood had soothed the beast. The prophecy was not about her death. It was about her life. Morwen's face was a mask of cold fury. "This changes nothing," she snapped, her voice ringing with authority. "The ritual must proceed. At the zenith of the winter solstice, as the prophecy dictates. His power will peak. He will need a vessel to pour the curse into. It is the only way to save him, to save us all." Pour the curse into. Lyra finally understood. They weren't just keeping her pure. They were preparing her to be a container, a sacrifice meant to be filled with all his darkness, all his pain, until it consumed her, leaving him clean, healed, and alone. She looked at the king kneeling before her, at the scars on his skin, the torment in his eyes. He had lived with this curse his entire life, and the only hope they had ever given him was that one day a girl would be born, who was strong enough to die for him. He looked at her, and his expression hardened. He had not known. The elders had kept the full truth of the ritual from him too. They had fed him a story of a bond, a cure. Not this, not the spiritual murder of an innocent. He rose to his full, terrifying height. He turned to face the High Elder, and the beast was back in his eyes, but it was a different beast now. It was not a mindless rage. It was a focused, protective fury, a king's fury. "There will be no ritual," he snarled. "It is the only way." Morwen's voice cracked. "Then we will find another way," he declared. He took a step forward, and the guards scrambled back, their fear of the elder overcome by their terror of him. "You will leave, now. Take your guards and your lies, and you will not come near this cell again." "You cannot do this," she shrieked. "The curse will consume you. It will take the kingdom with it." "This kingdom has been living in the shadow of your fear for too long," he shot back. He gestured back at Lyra, his hand open, not in a threat, but in a declaration. "She is not a vessel. She is not a sacrifice. She is the first light this blighted mountain has seen in a generation." He turned back to Lyra, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. "She is my mate." The words, spoken in the cold, silver-lined cellar, were a vow, an oath. They rewrote the world. He was claiming her, not as a cure, not as a tool, as his. The High Elder stared, her mouth working but no sound coming out. Her authority had been broken. Her plan, centuries in the making, was unraveling before her eyes. Without another word, she turned on her heel and swept away, her robed acolytes trailing in her wake like frightened crows. The captain of the guard hesitated, looking from his furious king to the retreating elder. "Go," Rorik commanded, his voice softer now, but no less absolute. The captain bowed his head. "Your Majesty." He and his men backed away slowly, their eyes still wide, their minds struggling to process the shift in power. They dragged the bodies of the fallen guards with them, their armor scraping against the stone, until the corridor was empty. And then they were alone, the king and his curse. The silence that fell was different. It was not the oppressive silence of the prison, but a fragile, uncertain quiet. The silence of two strangers standing on the edge of a precipice, the world they knew shattered behind them, and an unknown abyss before them. Rorik turned back to her, his massive frame seeming to fill the entire cell. He looked lost, his rage spent, leaving him hollowed out. He looked down at his own hands, then back at her, a silent question in his eyes. He was afraid, not of her, but for her. He had defied the elders. He had claimed her, but the curse was still a part of him. The monster was only sleeping. What would happen when it woke up? The mark on her wrist tingled, a faint phantom warmth. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time in a year, she was not just a prisoner. She was not a sacrifice. She was a choice, and he had chosen her. The blood that glowed like starlight in her veins hummed with a power she did not understand. But she knew one thing with a certainty that settled deep in her soul. Her year of silence was over. The silence in the aftermath was a fragile thing, spun from shock and the dust of a shattered reality. Rorik stood in the center of her small world, a king in a cage, his presence too vast for the silver-lined stone. The fury had ebbed from him, leaving behind an exhaustion so profound it seemed to carve new lines of sorrow onto his face. He watched her, his golden eyes holding a torrent of unspoken history, of pain she could only begin to guess at. He was a storm that had finally broken, and she was the strange, quiet ground that had absorbed the lightning without shattering. "They will not accept this," Lyra whispered, her voice still a stranger in her own throat. It was the most she had spoken in a year, and the words felt clumsy, heavy. His gaze didn't waver. "They do not have a choice. They have ruled this kingdom through you," she countered, a surprising thread of strength weaving into her tone. "Through your curse. They will not give up that power easily." A muscle clenched in his jaw. He knew she was right. The elders, with Morwen at their head, were the true architects of his prison. They had used his affliction as a shield and a scepter, controlling the court, the clans, and the king himself with the constant, looming threat of his own monstrous nature. He took a slow, deliberate step towards her. She didn't flinch. The primal fear that had seized her at his arrival had receded, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the very core of her being. It was the echo of her glowing blood, a quiet song that answered the storm in him. He stopped just out of arm's reach, a chasm of broken prophecies between them. I have never, he began, his voice a low rasp, felt it quiet, not since I was a boy. He was speaking of the curse, the shadow wolf, the monster he had called his own. For the first time she saw the sheer crushing weight of the burden he carried. To live every moment with a beast clawing at the inside of your own skin, screaming for release, for destruction, to know that any connection, any touch, could unleash hell. And she had silenced it, with a touch. Your blood, he said, his gaze dropping to her wrist, where the star-shaped mark was now just a faint silver scar again. What is it? I don't know, she answered honestly. I was born with the mark. The elders said it was a sign from the moon, that it marked me as the vessel. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. The word was a poison. They lied, he growled, the sound a low vibration in the small cell. They lied to us both. He looked around at the silver-laced walls, the grim, sterile cage they had kept her in. They told me you were being protected in a sanctuary. Honored. Not this. The bitterness in his voice was a shield for a deeper, more painful emotion. Guilt. He was the king. This had been done in his name, under his rule, even if he had been a prisoner to his own power. You couldn't have known, she said softly. His head snapped up, his golden eyes burning with a self-loathing that was terrifying to behold. I should have. I am the alpha of this land. My senses, my wolf, should have felt you, should have known you were here, suffering, but the curse. It blinds me, it deafens me with its rage. He took a ragged breath, turning away from her to face the broken door, his broad back a landscape of tension. It has been this way for so long, a fever in my blood that never breaks. It craves violence. It craves an end. The elders promised your bond would be that end. A final battle where one of us would be destroyed and the other freed. Lyra stared at his back, at the rigid line of his shoulders. They had engineered a fight to the death and called it a prophecy. They had sentenced one of them to die without ever telling them the truth. An instinct she didn't know she possessed rose up in her, a fierce, protective urge that was as bewildering as it was powerful. She took a step closer to him. Then another. The scent of him was still immense, pine, winter, and the faint, lingering smell of blood. But it no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a part of him, a part that was in pain. She reached out her hand, her fingers, pale and slender, hovered in the air just inches from the rough, dark fabric of his tunic. It was a terrifying, reckless impulse. He was still the cursed king. The monster was only sleeping. To touch him again, intentionally this time, was to risk waking it. He must have sensed her movement, her intent. He went utterly still, his breathing catching in his throat. He did not turn. He was giving her the choice. Her fingers brushed against his back. A tremor went through him, a violent shudder that had nothing to do with rage. It was the shock of a simple, gentle human contact. A touch not meant to chain, or fight, or subdue. Her entire palm came to rest flat against his back. The warmth was instantaneous. The same startling electric heat that had bloomed in her wrist now spread from her hand, sinking through his tunic, into his skin, into him. It was a current of quiet silver light flowing from her into the heart of his darkness. A low sound rumbled in his chest, not a growl. It was deeper, more resonant. A sound of relief so profound it bordered on pain. It was the sound a wolf makes when it finally finds its way home, after a long, brutal winter. He slowly turned to face her, his eyes wide, luminous in the dim light. The gold in them was softer now, clearer. He looked down at her hand, still resting against his chest where his back had been, and then back up to her face. He was so close. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, see the flicker of the torchlight reflected in his stunned eyes. She could see the intricate paths of the old scars on his face, the faint stubble along his jaw. He was real, not a myth, not a monster, a man. How, he breathed, the word a puff of disbelief. She shook her head, her own wonder reflected in her gaze. I don't know. His wolf, the one he had fought and feared his entire life, the one that had been screaming in his skull moments ago, was not just quiet. It was content. It was watching her through his eyes, not with hunger, but with a deep, instinctual reverence. He lifted his own hand slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. He didn't touch her skin. Instead, his fingers went to the star-shaped mark on her wrist, tracing its outline with a feather-light touch, as if it were the most sacred text he had ever read. The tingling hum returned, a soft vibration beneath her skin that answered his touch. "The star," he murmured, his thumb brushing over the center of it. "The legends of my bloodline speak of a star-catcher, a mate born under a fallen star, with the moon's silver in her veins. She was not meant to be a sacrifice. She was meant to be a balance, a queen. A queen. The word was so far from her reality of a silver cell and a wooden bowl that she couldn't comprehend it. She was Lyra, the forgotten, the waiting. They twisted the story, she realized, her voice barely a whisper. They turned a queen into a vessel. To control me, he finished, his eyes hardening with the new cold fury, a king's fury, directed not at himself, but at those who had betrayed his throne and his fated mate. To control the kingdom. A cursed king is a pliable one. He looked down at her, and the anger in his eyes softened as it met her gaze. Not anymore. He took her hand, the one not resting on his chest, and gently pulled her forward, out of the corner, out of the shadows. He led her to the broken doorway of the cell, to the edge of the world she had been denied for a year. The air from the corridor was still cold, still smelled of damp stone, but it was different. It was the air of freedom. He didn't let go of her hand. His grip was firm, possessive, but not painful. It was an anchor. "We are leaving this place," he said, his voice a low command that brooked no argument. He started to lead her out but paused, his gaze falling upon the silver-laced bars that flanked the entrance. He had ignored them in his rage, but now he saw them for what they were, the instruments of her torment. He released her hand and turned to face the wall. He reached out and wrapped his powerful hands around two of the thick, silver-woven bars. He pulled. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low groan of protesting stone and a shriek of tortured metal, the bars began to bend. His muscles bunched and strained, the veins standing out on his arms and neck. His eyes glowed with a fierce, golden light. The power of the Alpha King, unleashed not in rage, but in pure, focused will. With a final, deafening crack, a huge section of the wall, bars and all, ripped free. He threw the mass of stone and silver to the side, where it crashed with a thunderous boom that echoed down the empty corridor. He stood there, breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling. He had not destroyed the wall to escape. He had destroyed it because it had caged her. It was an act of symbolic liberation, an act of pure, untamed devotion. He turned back to her, his wildness softened by a vulnerability she was beginning to realize was always there, just beneath the surface. And then he did something that shattered the last of her fear. He went to one knee before her again. This time, it was not in shock or desperation. It was a conscious act of fealty. He took her hand, the one with the star mark, and he lowered his head until his brow rested against the back of her fingers. The great Alpha King, the monster, the curse. He bowed his head to her. His wolf, through him, was submitting, not as a vanquished foe, but as a loyal guardian to its long-lost other half. The storm had found its center. The king had found his queen. And in the cold, silent dark of the mountain's heart, the world began anew. The sound of the king kneeling echoed louder than the crash of the wall. It was a seismic shift, a crack in the foundation of their world. Lyra stood frozen, her hand held in his head bowed in a gesture of fealty that felt more sacred and more binding than any coronation. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. He did not move for a long moment. It was a vow made in silence, a promise that he was not just her king, but hers. The beast inside him, the shadow wolf she had been taught to fear, was acknowledging her as its master, its balance. Slowly he rose. He kept her hand in his grip a warm, solid anchor in the swirling chaos of her thoughts. The golden light in his eyes was steady now, the storm calmed to a deep, watchful intensity. He looked at her, not as a vessel, not as a cure, but as if she were the only thing holding his fractured world together. "Come," he said, his voice a low command that was also an invitation. You will not spend another moment in this darkness. He led her out of the cell, his hand possessive, protective. Her bare feet, so accustomed to the cold stone of her cage, met the equally cold stone of the corridor. But it felt different. This was movement. This was escape. Each step was a defiance. They walked past the bodies of the guards he had killed. Their faces were frozen in masks of shock and terror. Lyra's stomach twisted, but she did not look away. This was the reality of the man beside her. He was both protector and destroyer. The life he had just given back to her was paid for with the lives of others. The thought was a cold stone in her gut. Rorik felt her hesitation, the slight falter in her step. He paused, his gaze following hers to the fallen men. A shadow of pain crossed his face. "This was not me," he said, his voice a strained whisper. "It was the curse. It takes me and I wake up to this, to the blood, every time." He looked at her, his eyes raw with a grief so old it was a part of him. "Until you." He didn't need to say more. She understood. He was not a willing monster. He was a haunted man, chained to a beast he could not control. Her touch had not just calmed the beast. It had given the man back the reins, if only for a moment. He pulled her gently along, away from the carnage, up the winding stone stairs that led out of the mountain's gut. The air grew warmer, fresher with each step. The metallic tang of silver began to fade, replaced by the scent of beeswax, old tapestries, and burning hearths. The sense of the palace, the sense of a life she had never been allowed to know. They emerged into a deserted corridor, lit by ornate iron sconces. The walls were hung with faded tapestries depicting great hunts and ancient battles. It was a world of history, of power. She felt small and out of place in her thin gray tunic, her hair matted and her feet bare and dirty. She was a ghost walking through her own legacy. Servants and guards, hearing their approach, peered from doorways. Their eyes widened, first in terror at the sight of their unrestrained king, then in utter disbelief at the sight of the girl he held by the hand. The whispers started instantly, a ripple of shock spreading through the palace like wildfire. "It's him, unchained. And the girl, the sacrifice." "She's alive." Rorik ignored them. He walked with a purpose she had never seen, his long strides eating up the corridor. He was not just wandering, he was going somewhere. He was taking her somewhere. They reached a set of massive oak doors carved with the image of a snarling direwolf, the sigil of his house. 2 guards stood sentinel, their faces pale with fear, but they did not move to stop him. He pushed the doors open with one hand, revealing the throne room. It was a cavernous space. The ceiling soared into darkness, held up by pillars of black stone. A single massive throne, carved from the heart of an ancient weirwood tree and inlaid with jagged shards of obsidian, sat on a raised dais. Behind it, a vast floor-to-ceiling window of stained glass depicted a silver moon weeping blood-red tears onto a snow-covered mountain. The room was not empty. The elders were waiting for them. Morwen stood at the foot of the dais, her hands clasped, her face a mask of cold fury. The other 5 members of the council were arranged behind her, their expressions a mixture of fear and stern disapproval. "You dare?" Morwen's voice was a low hiss, but it carried across the vast room. "You bring this contamination into the heart of the kingdom?" Rorik did not release Lyra's hand. He led her forward until they stood directly before the High Elder, the power of the throne radiating at their backs. He was no longer the wild beast from the cellar. Here, in the seat of his power, he was every inch the king. "This contamination, as you call her," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, "is Lyra Valerius, your fated queen, and you will address her as such." A shocked murmur went through the other elders. Morwen's eyes narrowed to slits. "She is a vessel, a tool, nothing more. The prophecy is clear. She exists to cleanse you, not to rule beside you." "The prophecy," Rorik countered, his voice dripping with contempt, "is a lie you have been spinning for centuries, a story to keep your alpha on a leash." He squeezed Lyra's hand. "The leash is broken." He turned his head slightly, his golden gaze sweeping over the other elders. "I have trusted you. I have followed your counsel, locked myself away, shunned all contact, all for the sake of a cure you promised. I have lived in a cage of your making, while you ruled in my name." His voice dropped, becoming colder, deadlier. "No more." He took a step forward, forcing Morwen to take a step back. For the first time, Lyra saw a flicker of genuine fear in the woman's flinty eyes. "You will tell me the truth," he commanded. "All of it. The truth of the Starcatcher. The truth of what you planned for her." Morwen's lips thinned into a white line. She was a woman who had held absolute power for decades. She would not surrender it easily. "The truth is what I have told you. The curse is a taint of wild, chaotic magic in your bloodline. It can only be purged by transferring it to a body pure enough to contain it. The girl was born for this purpose. Her sacrifice would have saved us all." "Her murder, you mean," Rorik snarled. "You planned to use her like a sponge to soak up my darkness, and then discard her when she was full. You would have killed my mate to save me. She is not your mate until a bond is formed." An old, wizened elder with a long white beard spoke up. "And for you, the bond is a death sentence. It is the catalyst that would allow the curse to consume you both. We were preventing that. We were saving you from your own fated destruction. So you chose to destroy her instead," Rorik said softly, the quiet words more chilling than any roar. He turned his gaze back to Morwen. "What is she? What is this power in her blood that quiets the beast in mine?" Morwen hesitated. For a moment it seemed she would refuse, but the look in his eyes, the promise of a violence she could no longer control, broke her silence. "Her bloodline is ancient," she admitted, her voice tight with resentment. "Older than yours, they were moonsingers, shifters whose power was not in the brute force of the wolf, but in balance, in control. They could soothe, heal, and cleanse. We thought her blood's purity would act as a magnet for the curse." "You thought wrong," Rorik stated. He looked down at Lyra, a sense of awe in his expression. "It does not attract the curse. It commands it. It balances it." Lyra felt a tremor go through her. Moonsinger. The name was a whisper from a forgotten dream. A part of her she never knew existed. She was not just a girl with a strange birthmark. She was the heir to a power they had tried to twist into a weapon of self-destruction. "The kingdom is unstable," Morwen pressed, trying a new tactic, her voice laced with false concern. "The clans are restless. They have only tolerated a cursed king because they believed your affliction was contained. If they hear you are unchained, walking free, with the would-be sacrifice at your side, they will see it as a sign. The end of your line. They will challenge you for the throne." It was a threat. Cloaked as a warning, the elders controlled the flow of information to the other packs. They could stir the pot, incite rebellion. Rorik smiled. It was a cold, feral thing that held no humor. "Let them come," he said. "Let them see their king whole and in his right mind for the first time in his life. Let them see their queen, who carries the silver light of the moon in her veins." He pulled Lyra gently forward, moving around the elders, and ascended the 2 steps of the dais. He did not sit on the throne. Instead, he stood before it, turning to face the assembled council, pulling her to stand beside him. They were a united front, the king and his fated mate claiming their rightful place. "Your council is disbanded," he announced, his voice ringing with the absolute authority of the Alpha King. "Your lies are at an end. You will be confined to your chambers until I decide your fate." He looked pointedly at Morwen. "If you try to communicate with anyone outside this palace, if you try to spread your poison to the clans, I will consider it an act of treason. And I will show you what my curse truly looks like when it is unleashed by choice, not by madness." The threat was unmistakable. He was no longer their puppet. He was their judge, jury, and executioner. Morwen's face was a study in apoplectic rage, but she was smart enough to know she had lost. For now, she gave a stiff, almost imperceptible nod. Guards, who had been watching from the shadows, stepped forward to escort the defeated elders from the room. As Morwen passed, her cold gray eyes met Lyra's. There was no surrender in them, only a promise of future pain. "This is not over, little vessel," the look said. "He is a bomb, and you are only delaying the explosion." The great oak doors boomed shut, leaving them in the sudden, vast silence of the throne room. It was just the 2 of them. The weight of what had just happened crashed down on Lyra. She had gone from a prisoner in a cellar to the queen of a kingdom on the brink of war in the space of an hour. Her hand, still in his, trembled. Rorik felt it. He turned to her, his expression softening, the hard mask of the king falling away to reveal the man. "I am sorry," he said, his voice quiet. "I have pulled you from one cage and thrown you into another." "No," she said, finding her strength. "You have given me a choice. You have given me a name, and you have given me a fight." She looked up at him, her gaze clear and steady. "And I will not let you fight it alone." A wave of emotion, raw and overwhelming, passed over his face. He had been alone for so long, fighting a war inside his own soul. He reached up with his free hand, his fingers hesitating for a moment before gently touching her cheek. His touch was rough but infinitely tender. It did not burn. It did not kill. It felt like a promise. "Lyra Kue," he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. The bond between them, the one the elders had feared, the one the prophecy had foretold, was not a catalyst for destruction. It was a spark. And in the cold stone heart of the throne room, with a crown of thorns and lies shattered at their feet, it finally, truly, began to ignite. The mark beneath her skin began to burn. The burn was not fire. It was starlight, liquid and cool, spreading from the mark on her wrist and racing through her veins. A silent silver illumination from within. The throne room, with its shadows and obsidian throne, seemed to dim as the light inside her grew brighter. Rorik's hand was still on her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin with a reverence that made her tremble. He could feel it too, the thrum of her power, a quiet hum that vibrated through his touch and into his own fractured soul. His golden eyes widened, the feral glow in them softening into something like awe. "The bond," he whispered. "It's settling." It wasn't the violent, explosive joining the elders had predicted. It wasn't a battle for dominance or a transfer of pain. It was a resonance. The storm in his blood was not being silenced by force. It was being answered by a quiet, steady song. Her light was not extinguishing his darkness, but giving it a shape, a limit. For the first time, the curse was not a chaotic torrent, but a river with banks. He dropped his hand from her cheek, a flicker of his old fear returning. Does it hurt?" "No," Lyra answered, her voice soft but sure. "It feels right." And it did. For her entire life, she had felt like a book with a missing page. The star mark on her wrist had been a question without an answer. Now she understood. The power in her blood was not a complete thing on its own. It was a key, made for a single, impossibly complex lock. It was made for him. He took a step back, putting a careful distance between them. The instinct to protect her, even from himself, was deeply ingrained. The elders were right about one thing. The clans will hear of this. Morwen will make sure of it. They will see it as weakness. A king who could not control his curse, now clinging to a girl he was meant to sacrifice. "Then let them see," Lyra said, her chin lifting. The timid, silent girl from the cellar was gone, burned away by the silver light in her blood. In her place was someone new, someone who had been given a name, a purpose, and a king to stand beside. Let them see a king who was strong enough to break his chains. Let them see a queen who will not be a sacrifice for anyone. A slow, genuine smile touched his lips for the first time. It transformed his harsh, scarred face, chasing away the shadows and revealing the man he might have been if fate had been kinder. "A queen," he repeated, the word tasting of hope. The heavy doors to the throne room creaked open. An elderly servant, a woman with a kind, wrinkled face and fear in her eyes, bowed low. "Your Majesty," she stammered, her gaze flickering nervously between Rorik and Lyra. "The kitchens have prepared a meal, and chambers have been made ready for the lady." Lyra realized she was starving. The thin gruel she'd had that morning felt like a lifetime ago. The battle, the fear, the sudden rush of power had drained her. Rorik nodded to the servant. "Thank you, Elspeth. See to it the Lady Valerius has whatever she requires. The finest chambers, a bath, new clothes. She is my guest." He paused, his gaze meeting Lyra's. "She is my queen." The servant Elspeth looked at Lyra with wide, compassionate eyes. She saw not a contamination or a vessel, but a girl, thin and pale, standing barefoot on the cold stone floor, wearing a prisoner's rags. She saw the ghost the kingdom had tried to forget. Of course, your majesty, she said softly, and curtsied again, this time to Lyra. It was the first sign of respect, of acceptance, Lyra had received from anyone other than Rorik. It was a small thing, but it felt monumental. Go, Rorik said to her gently. Rest, eat, you have been through more today than most endure in a lifetime. She didn't want to leave his side. The fragile peace that had settled between them felt like it might evaporate if she walked away. The curse was sleeping, but for how long? As if hearing her thoughts, he added, I will not be far. I have a council to dissolve, and a kingdom to remind of who its alpha is, but I will not let you out of my sight for long. His eyes held a promise. I will not let them take you from me again. She nodded, allowing Elspeth to lead her from the throne room. As she left, she glanced back. Rorik was watching her, his expression a complex mixture of hope and grim resolve. He was a king with 1,000 battles ahead of him, but for the first time, he was not fighting alone. The chambers they gave her were breathtaking. Silks the color of twilight draped the walls, and a fire roared in a great stone hearth, chasing the chill from her bones. A massive bed was piled high with furs, and a steaming bath, scented with lavender and pine, was waiting for her. It was a world away from the cold, damp stone of the vault. As she sank into the hot water, scrubbing away the grime and despair of the past year, Lyra looked at her reflection. A pale, thin girl with eyes that had seen too much stared back, but there was something new in them. A spark, a flicker of silver light that mirrored the mark on her wrist. The moon singer, the star catcher, she was more than just a survivor, she was a power. Later, dressed in a simple but elegant gown of deep blue velvet that Elspeth had laid out, she sat by the fire, a tray of roasted meat, bread, and cheese untouched before her. Her stomach was a knot of anxiety. Rorik was out there, in the palace, facing the viper's nest of the court. He was confronting the lies that had defined his entire life. Was her presence, her touch, enough to keep the beast at bay? A knock came at the door. Her heart leaped. It wasn't Rorik. It was the captain of the guard, the grim-faced man from the cellar. His expression was unreadable. He bowed stiffly. My lady, the king has sent me. He thought you might wish for some air. The western battlements are quiet at this hour. It was a test, a message. Rorik was showing his court, his guards, that she was to be treated with respect, that she was free. Thank you, Captain, she said, her voice steady. I would like that. He escorted her through the winding corridors, his armored footsteps, a stark contrast to her soft slippers. They walked in silence. He was a man of duty, and his duty had just been turned on its head. He had been trained to chain his king. Now he was assigned to protect his king's forbidden mate. The air on the battlements was sharp and cold, tasting of snow and pine from the vast forest that surrounded the mountain fortress. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brutal streaks of orange and purple. Below, the kingdom sprawled out, a patchwork of dark woods and scattered lights. It was beautiful and terrifying. This was the land she was now supposed to help rule. He is not what we thought, the captain said gruffly, his voice startling her. He was staring out at the horizon, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. No, Lyra agreed softly. He is not. We have only ever known the curse, the captain continued, more to himself than to her. The roars from the dungeons, the violent aftermaths. We followed the elders because we believed they were containing a monster for the good of the kingdom. He turned to look at her, his eyes searching. Today, in that cellar, I did not see a monster. I saw a king protecting his own. The elders lied, she said simply. Aye, he nodded, a grim understanding dawning in his eyes. That they did. He straightened up, his loyalty shifting, solidifying. The royal guard is loyal to the crown, my lady, not to the council. The king will have no trouble from us. It was a pledge, another small victory, but a crucial one. As darkness fell, a new scent drifted on the wind, smoke, acrid and foul, not from the palace hearths. It was coming from the direction of the elders' wing. The captain stiffened, his head snapping up. What is that? Before he could move, a figure appeared at the far end of the battlement, Morwen. She was alone, her gray robes flapping in the wind, her face illuminated by a strange flickering orange light. She was holding a lit torch. I told you this was not over, little vessel, she called out, her voice thin but sharp against the wind. You cannot balance him, you can only delay the inevitable. Morwen, the captain roared, drawing his sword. You are confined to your chambers. This is treason. It is survival, she shrieked, her composure finally shattering, revealing the fanatic beneath. He is a blight. He will bring this kingdom to ruin, and she is a false hope, a matchstick in a hurricane. She raised the torch. In her other hand she held a small leather pouch. With a practiced movement, she threw a fine powder from the pouch into the torch's flame. The fire erupted with a sickly green-black light, releasing a plume of thick, oily smoke. The scent was suffocating, wolfsbane, silver dust, and something else, something ancient and corrupt. He smells it now, Morwen hissed, a crazed look in her eyes. The scent of his cage, the scent of his failure. It will drive the beast mad, and when it is done with him, it will come for you. The kingdom will see what happens when you forsake sacrifice for sentiment. Lyra's blood ran cold. It was a poison for the mind, an attack on his senses, on the fragile peace she had given him. Even from this distance she heard it, a roar. It ripped through the palace, a sound of pure, untamed agony. It was the sound from the cellar, but 100 times worse. The sound of a man being ripped apart from the inside. What have you done, Nutad? The captain yelled, charging toward Morwen, but she was already backing away toward a hidden stairwell, her wild laughter echoing on the wind. I have shown them the truth. There is no cure. There is only the cage or the pyre. She disappeared into the darkness. The captain didn't hesitate. My lady, get inside, bar the door. He raced after Morwen, his duty clear. But Lyra couldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could feel him. Through the half-formed bond, she could feel his pain. It was a firestorm of confusion, rage, and a terror so profound it felt like dying. The poison was working. It was turning his own mind against him, waking the beast with a vengeance. He would kill everyone. He would destroy everything he had just fought to reclaim. And then, when the madness passed, he would be left alone with the blood and the guilt, and the elders would have won. She would not let that happen. Ignoring the captain's order, she ran. Not to her chambers, not to safety, but toward the sound of the roar, toward the heart of the storm. She followed the trail of his pain, a pull in her blood she could not deny. She found him back in the throne room. He had shattered the great oak doors to splinters. He was thrashing in the center of the room, his eyes a blazing, mindless gold, his hands clenched into claws. The shadow wolf was in complete control, lost in a haze of poisoned rage. Servants and guards were either fleeing or lying broken on the floor. He roared again, a sound of pure desolation, and slammed his fist into one of the black stone pillars, cracking it. He was lost. He was destroying his own throne. Lyra stopped in the ruined doorway, her breath catching in her throat. This was the monster they had all feared. The mindless destruction. He scented her. His head snapped around, his glowing eyes fixing on her. A low, guttural snarl ripped from his chest. It was not a sound of recognition. It was the sound of a predator identifying its prey. He took a step toward her, then another. This was it, the final test. The moment the elders had planned for, the beast, unleashed and unstoppable, coming for the one person who could end it. Her fear was a cold, sharp blade in her gut. But beneath it, the silver light in her blood answered. It surged, not in defense, but in defiance. She was not a sacrifice. She held out her hand. Rorik, she said, her voice shaking but clear, projecting it across the room. He snarled, ignoring the name, his focus entirely on the hunt. She took a step toward him. Rorik, she called again, louder this time, infusing the word with all the power humming in her veins. I am here, he faltered. For just a second, a flicker of confusion crossed the beast's features. The song in her blood was cutting through the poison's noise. She walked toward him, her steps slow and steady, her eyes locked on his. She did not stop until she stood directly before him, close enough to feel the heat rolling off his body, to see the madness churning in the depths of his golden eyes. He loomed over her, a god of rage and pain. The beast inside him screamed for her blood. She reached up and placed her hand flat against his chest, directly over his heart. The contact was an explosion. Silver light erupted from her hand, so bright it bleached the color from the room. It flowed into him, a tidal wave of calm, of starlight, of unwavering certainty. It was not a gentle soothing this time. It was a reclamation, a war for his soul. He cried out, a sound that was half roar, half sob. He stumbled back, his body convulsing. The golden light in his eyes flickered violently, battling the silver light that was flooding his senses. He fell to his knees. The great Alpha King, the Shadow Wolf, the curse of the Volkov line, collapsed at her feet. He threw his head back and howled, a long, mournful sound of a battle being lost and won. The golden light in his eyes faded, receding like a dying fire. When he looked up at her, the storm was gone. The poison was purged. All that was left was the man, his eyes clear and filled with tears. He was Rorik, and he was free. He reached out, his hand trembling, and took hers. He brought it to his lips, pressing a kiss to the star mark on her wrist. Then he lowered his head to the floor before her. The king who had twice knelt for his mate, now knelt for his curse, and for the woman who had finally taught him its name. And in the ruins of his throne room, under the gaze of a weeping moon, he chose to stay. The air tasted of thaw, of melting snow and damp earth, a promise of green things to come. Winter had broken its hold on the mountain. The stone, which for so long had been Lyra's prison and tomb, was finally breathing again. 6 months. 6 months since the night of fire and poison. 6 months since the king had knelt in the ruins of his own throne room, his soul laid bare at her feet. She stood on the high balcony of the royal chambers, a thick fur cloak wrapped around her shoulders, watching the world awaken. The palace was no longer a place of fear. The silence was no longer heavy with dread, but filled with a quiet, humming peace. Morwen's laughter had been the last gasp of a dying age. She and the remaining elders were now the prisoners, confined to the very silver-lined cells they had designed. Their power was a ghost, their lies a cautionary tale whispered by servants in the firelit halls. The clans had come, just as Morwen had predicted. They had arrived for the Winter Council bristling with suspicion, their alphas ready for a challenge, eager to test the weakened, cursed king they had heard so much about. They came expecting to find a madman on a leash, or a kingdom in ashes. They did not find a monster, they found Rorik. He met them in the rebuilt throne room, not on his obsidian throne, but on the floor, among them. He was clear-eyed, in command. The full crushing force of his alpha presence was unleashed, not in chaotic rage, but in absolute, unshakable authority. And beside him, her hand in his, he had presented her, his queen. The whispers had been immediate. A gasp of shock had rippled through the assembled alphas. She was the vessel, the sacrifice. What was she doing here, alive and whole, standing beside him as an equal? He had not hidden his scars, he had not hidden her. He had told them the truth, of the elders' lies, of the twisted prophecy, of the girl who was not meant to die for him, but to live for him, to live with him. He had shown them his curse and his cure, his shadow and his star, and then he had let them see. He'd met her eyes, and for a breathtaking moment, he had let the Shadow Wolf surface. The golden light in his eyes had blazed. The air had grown cold, and the ancient, terrifying power had filled the room. The alphas had tensed, their hands flying to their weapons. But then Lyra had placed a hand on his arm. The silver light had hummed beneath her skin, a quiet song only he could hear, and the golden fire in his eyes had softened, banked, and retreated, leaving only the calm, steady gaze of their king. He had demonstrated his power and his control. Their control. One by one, the alphas of the great clans had bowed their heads, not in fear, but in awe. Footsteps, quiet and familiar, approached from behind. Strong arms wrapped around her, pulling her back against a solid, warm chest. The scent of pine and winter, a scent that had once been her terror, was now her home. "It's quiet," Rorik murmured, his voice a low rumble against her hair. She knew what he meant. The screaming in his blood was gone. The constant, clawing rage had been soothed. "The wolf is sleeping," she whispered, leaning her head back against his shoulder. He was no longer a storm held at bay. He was the mountain itself, solid, enduring. The curse was still a part of him, a shadow in his soul, but it was a guardian now, not a beast. A power that listened, a power that obeyed. "No," he corrected gently, his lips brushing against her temple. He turned her in his arms to face him. The morning light caught the silver in his dark hair, the fine lines around his eyes that were no longer haunted, but filled with a deep, unwavering calm. He is not sleeping. He is watching the sunrise with his mate. He lifted a hand, his callous thumb tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was no longer a question, no longer a fear. It was a certainty, a statement. You are mine. The bond between them was a living thing now, a current of silver and gold that flowed constantly between them. She could feel his strength, his contentment, and he could feel her light, her love. They were two halves of a single soul, forged in a silver cage and tempered in fire. The first rays of the sun crested the jagged peaks of the eastern mountains. The light was not yet gold, but a pale, ethereal silver. It washed over the snow-dusted forests and the quiet battlements, making the world look clean, new, a silver dawn. He had been the king of shadows, a prisoner in his own skin. She had been the girl in the cellar, a ghost waiting for her own end. They had been a curse and a key, a storm and a cage. Now they were just Rorik and Lyra, a king and his queen, a wolf and his moon. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. His breath was warm in the cool air. The great aching loneliness that had clung to him like a shroud was gone, burned away by the steady light in her soul. The moon had seen their scars long enough. Under the silver dawn, she watched them heal.